film has found a way to manage to lead and also to contribute through the different stages, which is films all begin remote. They are writers alone at home most of the time or in coffee shops, working away by themselves or with their writing partner, right? 1 or 2 days a week, you go in. You're in hybrid mode, right? We need to meet with the production designer. What does this look like? Tuesday, we have to meet with the costumers. You come in for a couple hours, and then they go off and write. They get notes from the studio, notes from the star, right? They're writing. And then one day, $125,000 a day, you are on set, all of you, all the time, day and night, for principal photography, and it's rough. And then you go back to remote. And through all that remote, hybrid, in-person, hybrid, remote, there are established ways in which film has worked without even really ever calling it remote work. Like, oh, my writers are in remote work mode. It's not. It's just a thing that's appropriate. So when you bring up, yes, there are absolute advantages to working in person together. I completely agree with you. I just think that a lot of the world became aware of the advantages of remote work at times. For example, a small tech company like mine, the ability to hire talent globally, that's huge. I am not Meta where I can throw $500,000 at someone and say, move to SF or move to London, right? I'm not. So if I want to get the best designer that digs what I do and has a similar value system to Sukha, and she's in Montreal, I can do it.
Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrisey, where we share insights from great thinkers. So I'm excited to be joined by Puri, a multi-time founder and former film executive currently working on the Sukha, which helps remote workers overcome procrastination and distraction so they can be focused, happier, and healthier. Stephen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Tuesdays with Morrisey.
I'm excited to have a conversation about the Sukha and remote work and maybe even the broader societal impacts that you're impacting.
Yeah.
But first, I want to start with film. For 20 years, you worked in the film industry, working on films from Godzilla to Star Trek, shows like 24, Transformers, Die Hard, Wolverine, and more. What was that part of your life like, and how did you initially get into that?
A complete accident. I'll tell you, my story, if there's something fun about my story, is that shit just happens to me. Lucky stuff falls in my lap, okay? And I think there is an element of, if you work hard and make the best of the opportunity, something happens there. But I'm not going to lie to you. I have had some just lucky breaks. I will give you an example. When I was little, my parents were both engineers at IBM. My mom was a software engineer, a coder. Dad, electrical engineer, designed logic, essentially CPU chips for IBM, right? So when I was little, I was a little code monkey, hacking on my little computer and learning how to do stuff. And so I went to USC in Los Angeles. I left Northern Virginia, where I grew up, went to USC, and was a Watson Scholar at IBM, which meant they gave me a job whenever I wanted. So if I want to make money during school, I could be a coder there. So I was a junior software engineer at IBM, making a little money on the side, right? So I'm doing this, and USC is a very strong cinema TV school. So a bunch of my buddies in my dorm were in cinema TV, young aspiring writers and directors and stuff like that, right? So I'm there, and I happened by luck of the draw to be in Los Angeles when film went digital. And there were very few people in that Venn diagram of can talk engineering and could talk to a creative person. So there I was sitting right there when suddenly everyone's like, oh my God, we can digitize film. We can do computer graphics on film. It was the computing power had gotten there. Kodak had offered scanners and recorders so you could take photochemical film, turn it into a rasterized image, manipulate it, and put it back on film, right? Now everything is digital, the whole process. So I was there, fell in my lap, happened to, meet some people who were like, oh my God, come here, kid. You seem like you know what we're doing here. And my career went really well. So I did about 14 movies, reproduced the CG, and the titles for that, including we won the Academy Award for Independence Day, for the visual effects on Independence Day. And, a rising tide lifts all boats. I was one of those boats. So the director and the producer and writer and I of Independence Day started a company together to do computer graphics. Raised like $15 million, which was not that hard when you have an Academy Award 3 months old on the shelf. People are like, oh shit, you must know what you're doing, right? So that was super cool. Did that. Had a moment definitely in my mid to late 20s where I was like, okay, this is amazing. I've been super lucky. I've been doing this for like 6, 8 years. And am I going to wake up, be like 30, 40, 50 years old and just be doing the effects on, the sequel to the sequel to the Transformers to the sequel, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. And we sold the company, a German conglomerate, sort of like Liberty Media of Germany, called Dustberg. They knew Roland because he's very famous in Germany. And they bought the company. So it was like a 6X exit. I had a bunch of money and I took 2 years and just kind of traveled the world. What do I want to do? I'm closing in on 30. And the thing that stood out for me, I was like, you know what? It was really cool working on other people's movies. I wonder if there's any chance I could get into making movies myself, like find material, this whole thing. And so I set out on that journey, and that took like another 10 years. That was, the one that culminated with being an executive vice president at DreamWorks, on the DreamWorks lot, the vice president at Fox. And what was amazing is, like, at Fox, I got to work on franchises that I grew up on. Like, I remember seeing Die Hard when I was little. I was the executive on Die Hard 5, It's like kind of funny. We were sitting there going like, I'm meeting with John McClane. Like, we're literally discussing how are we going to make this movie? We're going to make it. It's like kind of surreal. And like Hugh Jackman, incredibly nice. One of the nicest above the line first dollar gross stars that I worked with, just a genuinely nice person. And when I got the job at Fox, he was the first of the talent in any of the movies that I was working on. They called me. He was on set for another movie. Called me, goes, "Hey, Stevie, I heard you're going to be on Wolverine with me, and this will be exciting. We're going to do it together. I'm going to come see you when I'm finished on set." He was, I think, in Detroit on Real Steel with Sean Levy. So that was like super fun. Again, just like random stuff, right? So that was how I got into film and ended up working on a bunch of movies. Most of them are kind of mediocre. You set out to make a good movie, it's hard. No one really sets out to make a bad movie, yet there are a lot of them. It's just a lot of things need to come together and lightning needs to strike for you to have that wow movie.
A lot of your story captures the Malcolm Gladwell formula in a sense, like hard work times time times opportunity.
Yeah.
Just in the right place at the right time for some of this stuff.
Yes. Funny, I just saw him on the street. He was here for South by Southwest. I was driving down 6th Street and he was standing there like holding court with some
His
people.
His hair is all over the place.
You can't miss the hair. Just standing on the sidewalk.
So interesting story. So I'd read Outliers, of course, and when I moved, I was working at a consulting firm and I had a really tough boss. She was from the Philippines, and this actually might tie into our conversations around culture and work and such. But I had a really tough boss, and I was like, she was from the Philippines, and like I just never felt like I was meeting her expectations. And so I went to a mentor of mine and said, "Hey, and it will come back to Gladwell, I promise."
It's all coming around.
Yeah. So I said to my mentor within the company, I was like, "Hey, like I'm having a really tough time with this manager. What do you think I should do?" And he's like, "Well, how do you feel?" And I was like, "Well, I feel like I'm not meeting her expectations." And he's like, "Have you told her that?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Go tell her that and see what happens." Go up to her, say, "Hey, I don't feel like I'm meeting your expectations." Everything changed.
Really?
Like it gave her some awareness, and then she gave me the tipping point. I had never read the tipping point. Oh,
wow. Okay.
She was like, "Hey, I accidentally bought 2 copies. Like, I want you to have one and we can talk about it." And I was a big reader at the time. 6 months later, that project's over. And she calls me and says, "Hey, like, I have tickets to go see Malcolm Gladwell speak at SMU. Like, you should come." And I thought it was so cool. Like, you read his stuff and it's like I had no idea. He was way funnier. He was kind of like a stand-up comedian. He was way funnier than I expected. But I guess that might be what you do at book tours. He was promoting that book, I think, Talking to Strangers at the time.
Right. I have a question. What is the book that you have gifted to more people than any other book?
That's a really good question. For people, I've given Gentleman in Moscow, a novel, to a lot of people because it's a really fun novel. I'd say a lot of people will ask me, like, they want to find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. And all that stuff. And I think a really good entry level book for that is The Four Agreements. So I've given The Four Agreements to a lot of people just because I think it's like a really approachable gateway to what I call emotional spiritual growth in a way that's, allows you to open up a new world while still keeping your feet on the ground.
That is an amazing reference. Well, I will tell you this about Four Agreements is, so Laura, my wife, so we've been together for 10 years. We had 1 year we separated where we were like, are we sure we're right for each other? Are we going to do this and the whole thing? And I know she had her mental list of like, I wish Stephen would, or I wish Stephen would not, whatever. And I had my mental list. And so we took this time apart that Laura suggested. And in that time, that was one of the books that she read. And when we got back together, she showed me her journal. She's like, I want you to understand the journey I've been on while we have been apart. And that factored into it in a really strong way. And our relationship now is stronger for having had that year of, don't know. And the growth that kind of forces on both of you. Well, I guess you choose to accept the growth of how does that work? So that's a fantastic reference. To answer your question for me, without a doubt, that book is a kind of odd book. And I think it's out of print, called The Lessons of History. And it's written by Will and Ariel Durant, who wrote The History of Civilization, the 4,000 million, page, here's what we all did. And what was interesting is when, they as an older married couple had spent most of their life studying the history of human civilization and writing about it. They wrote this really short, pithy book on what did we learn? We looked at all the ebbs and flows of governments, of cultures, of economies, and what did we learn? And that book is not a long read, but I'm telling you, each chapter in there could be its own college course. It is so dense with really well-observed thoughts on what we do as people. And I enjoy that book immensely. So yeah, that's probably the number one book when someone's like looking for something interesting about human psychology and sociology. I'm like, read this.
Yeah, when you're sharing that, I think about just the concept, like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Completely.
I wrote an article 2 weeks ago or so that was like, I've worked in professional services like consulting for a while, and then I worked at a tech startup that was doing like home services, like contractors, like HVAC, and like they're both going through like consolidation and digital transformation and such. And I was thinking like, all right, like what are the things that both of these groups are going to have to be successful? And I wrote this article and published it. And then after I published the article, I realized, all the things I put in there were true. They've always been the things that any company in any industry, like you got to have entrepreneurial pathways for team members, and you got to have the best technology, and you got to have scale to amortize costs. Like as much as things change, they never change. You have a really great story that when we first met, you told about your first time ever doing yoga. We couldn't have this conversation without that story, and we can use it as a segue to talk about the Sukha and your observations in film and how those organizations worked and what caused you to start Centered and then Sukha.
I'm so flattered that you remember that story. So,
well, I remember with the story. It's funny because I'm glad we're going to have it recorded because I've heard it 2 or 3 times and I'm mind blown every single time. But some of the details escape me, kind of like a good comedy show. You laughed a lot, but you can't remember the jokes.
The punchline was, I think he did yoga. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me tell a concise version of that just to fill our intrepid listeners in. So years ago, ex-girlfriend of mine, who is to this day one of my best friends, she was the director of marketing for YogaWorks. And I was a young executive in Hollywood. And as the gesture of boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, she said, here, let me give you a mat. And I'm going to give you a class card. So you can go to, I think it was 8 or 12 classes for, free. I got you this, blah, blah. Try it out. I think you're like, as a good boyfriend, I did the 8 or 12 classes. At the end of those, I was like, wow, this is a nice workout. But there was not the thing the next morning of like, oh, I can't wait to get back. It was like, I did it. Check. Good boyfriend thing done. So she's like, cool. She's like, okay, great. It was not for you. Fine, you know. So I was traveling like a year or two later in India. My father is from India. I was traveling with my father in India a year or two later, and we were with a bunch of family friends who had basically, we were at a brunch in Los Angeles, and they had shamed my dad into going to India with me. They were like, oh, you know, my birth name is Satish, right? It's like, Satish has been to India 6 times when he was little. And now as an adult, like, you never go. What is this? His culture, his heritage. So my dad's like, okay, fine, we'll go. They're like, come with us. So we went sort of as their guests in India. And part of the trip was they wanted to show me things I had not seen before. Because usually going to India means visiting certain relatives. So most of the trip is eaten up in the same homes with the same, you know, relatives eating the same curry, right? So they're like, no, you have to come. One of these places is a national park called Ranthambore that is in the center of India. And it is famous for this thing. It's sort of like, imagine the analog in this country would be like Yosemite or Yellowstone or something, or maybe you go once when you're young on a field trip or with your parents, and then maybe you go once with like your fiance later. It's beautiful to go to, but it's not something you go like all the time, right? It's not like running down to the grocery store. So they're like, you have to come to Ranthambore. And the thing that's famous about it is the Royal Bengal Tiger Preserve. So you go there and you hire a trekker to go out into the forest and see if you can find the Bengal tigers the day that you're there, the weekend you're there, right? So it's super fun. So we get there in the middle of the afternoon, like right around lunchtime, and the Oberoi there has, through I'm sure graft or corruption, or whatever, put a beautiful hotel inside the preserve, right? How this works with the Department of the Interior Minister, let's not ask, right? But they have it. But the deal that they made was they said they would not break the tree line. So all of the villas there are basically yurts, like $1,000, $1,500 a night, luxury tents, wooden floors that are scattered in the forest beneath the tree lines. You can't really see them unless you walk up to them, right? So we check in, and they don't even give you keys. They just say, oh, when you leave the main tent, you'll see a path to your right, these flagstones with marigolds. Walk for about 10 minutes, you'll see a yurt. That's yours. So we did this. So my dad and I go off to our yurt. Everyone disperses to sort of, you know, settle in. And I had energy. So I was like, I'm going to go walk around. So I walked down some of these paths, and there was a clearing. And in the middle of the clearing, there's a little Indian guy just standing there in his white dhoti, completely alone, like 30 meters in the middle of this thing. So I had nowhere to be at that moment. I walked out to him. I was like, hi, what are you doing? Totally straight face. He's like, I'm leading a yoga practice. And I kind of look around because there is no one in sight. There's not even a tiger in sight. There is nobody around, right? I was like, oh, you lead a yoga practice for whom? He's like, whoever's here. Okay. When do you lead this practice? He's like, in the afternoon. Totally like the questions I'm asking don't have ridiculous answers, right? So it's like, if I go to lunch with my family and friends, I come back here, you're going to be here teaching yoga. He's like, yes. Okay, cool. So I go to lunch, and of course, everyone at the table is Indian. And it's sort of like, I think I was the guy who comes to Los Angeles and has a whole bunch of friends in Los Angeles and wants to go to Disneyland. And they're all like, oh, we've been to Disneyland. We're so good. You go, right? So I pitch someone going to do yoga. They're like, we're good. I go out there. He's standing there. There's a really tall German guy, sort of about your height, and a beautiful DSLR sitting on the side of the clearing. Clearly the German guy's camera. And I walk out to the two of them. And as soon as I walk out, the guy says, let us begin. And he led a yoga class in this clearing, in this Bengal tiger preserve. And at the end of it, I wanted to call Allison. I was like, I was not ready. Like, with the gift you gave me, I just didn't know how to open it. I said, I feel clearer, straighter. I feel like centered. And it was a beautiful moment. And that began a daily yoga practice. And it is literally how I met Laura. We were in yoga together in Manhattan.
So you said the word centered.
Yes,
you started a company called Centered. Talk a little bit about what that company was, and then how did that fit into, you know, the CG, like the computer graphic stuff, to doing your own executive producing stuff? Like, where did this yoga story fit into the next phase of entrepreneurship?
Okay, so returning to our theme of lucky stuff happens to me and I try and like make the best of it, right? So I had a moment, and this is a couple of years into Fox, where I hated it. I had loved DreamWorks. It was an amazing studio. Every night at DreamWorks, there's an impetus to go home and try and make your projects 1% better. And at Fox, the impetus was much more go home and try and make them 1% cheaper. Can you shave the budget? Can you give something up? Just make it cheaper, right? Which is absolutely a great risk avoidance strategy. It's been in business for years. Like there are many positives to it, but it's not super inspiring when you're like, okay, so I'm tasked with making a mediocre script for Die Hard 5 and figuring out how can I shave $1 million off the budget, right? Do you really need 3 tanks? No, I guess we have 2 tanks. Do you really need to have bystanders? It could happen at night. I guess it could happen at night. You know what I mean? It's that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Where like,
this has got to be over time. That's got to be pretty draining.
You know, exactly. And I had this moment at Fox where I was like, I don't know that anything that I'm working on that's actually going to get made. Like I had projects that I thought were great, but they were not getting traction with my boss, who was the chairman of the Filmed Entertainment. And he was really focused on Die Hard and the Wolverine sequel. And I was like, I'm going to wake up, be like 40, 50 years old and just making Die Hard 11 be like, hey kids, daddy's got to go to work. Make Die Hard 11, made for your college. So I was like, And my boss knew I did not like him. I didn't respect him. He didn't like me either. So we had a moment where I was just like, okay, how do I go do something where I actually have some agency? And I can, even if I don't succeed, I will do something I believe in, right? So I left to go do the thing that I knew from before, which was run a tech company, right? Started 2 tech companies. One was like a collaborative Instagram, it's like a social media app. Didn't work. Got to like 60,000, daily actives. We did not get to millions. Eventually, Instagram, Snapchat, those guys had inflections. They did a great job with user experience and a great job with marketing, right? So those took off. Had 2 failures, which were really humbling. And it was like, I almost felt embarrassed to bump into friends at restaurants and the gym, whatever, because they're always like, how's that going with your thing? I was like, it didn't work. It didn't work on the next thing. So that was hard. And then in doing both those companies, which were entirely remote, it taught me a lot about focus, about what were the real challenges of modern work. And with the pandemic, suddenly everyone was faced with, work is not going to be the exact same drive 45 minutes to an office, sit there under fluorescent lights, try and find my red stapler and throw the fax machine out the window sort of thing, right? It was like, wow, it's being like forced to like leap forward. And that was really inspiring to me about, creating the Sukha. It was like, how do I address the problems that I have and a lot of our early members have?
Yeah. You say, I read something from you. You said, my belief is that the most powerful foundation for productivity is having a supportive community. So we adapted the technology to emphasize this aspect, and we changed the name of the company from Centered to the Sukha Company. What does the Sukha mean?
I'll tell you, this is the thing. So Laura and I got married 2 years ago, and on our honeymoon, we went to Bali. Very lucky that we're at a place in our lives we can go and take 10 days and go, to a little island, right? So the funny thing is when you run, small businesses or you're running any business, you're continually inundated with questions from the level of like, hey, how are we going to close this client to who's going to be responsible for taking the trash out, right? So it's just this nonstop thing. But in those 10 days, everyone's like, leave Stephen alone. He's on his honeymoon. Don't email him. Don't bug him, right? So I was talking to Laura and I was like, I think that there is a deeper thing of what I want to do with this. And I want to understand what it is. And I think it begins with like, can I conceive of a name that's appropriate for this? She's like, yeah, I'm totally down. How can I help? I was like, I know it sounds kooky, but I think like my unconscious will work best if I talk to a couple of people who are our power members and ask them like what it is they like about what we do. And maybe that'll feed over the next 10 days. Something will bubble up in my unconscious. She's like, all right, great. Take a day or two, talk to a couple of people, enjoy whatever. I'll be by the pool, right? So I talked to one of our members and I'm telling you, he was so much smarter than I am, and was. I asked him 8 minutes of really dumb questions. Hey, Adam, what features do you like in there? Do you like the music? We have 1,000 hours of custom music. Oh, do you like the coaches? So we do this for 8 minutes and I'm trying to figure out what's the thing that hooks him, right? And at the end of it, I was like, Adam, it was really, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. I'm wrapping up. And he goes, listen, Stephen, I don't think you asked me the right question.
I love that.
Okay. What was the right question? He's like, the question you should have asked me is, why do I pay you? Okay, dude. That's probably a bolder question than I would have asked. So, Adam, why do you pay me? He's like, at 3:00, I can be playing with my kids. Or at 6:00, I can be like, where the hell did the day go? He said, the difference is, did I open Sukha in the morning? I pay you so I can be playing with my kids at 3. And I was like, dude, you have completely reset my mind on what it is we do. So I'm talking to Laura at dinner, and I'm the excited guy being like, oh my God, I talked to this one guy today. So helpful. You'll believe this is what he said. I could never have thought of it that way. I was always focused on we're Focus app 14, or are we, productivity mate 12, or Die Hard 9. And Laura and I were brushing our teeth that night, and we're going to bed. And she said, you know what it is? I think what you're really focused on is not productivity. You're not focused on focus. I think what you're focused on is helping people be happier. And the productivity is just the path. She's like, so why don't you name it about the goal? And we do a lot of yoga, as you know. There are a lot of Sanskrit concepts that are present in our life. And the Sukha, the concept of self-fulfilled happiness, is a really powerful one. So we were talking about this, and it was like, why don't we call the company the Happiness Company, the Sukha Company? And that's where it came from. And it's a weird name. A lot of people don't know what it means. But I think once you discover what it means, you recognize it's a different angle on how to manage your day than just, hey man, can you squeeze a little more productivity out of each minute with this, AI timer, And
it also gives you an entry point to tell the story and help people find ways to connect in their work with their work and their time differently. I love that story. One of the most meaningful things, I believe, is when people are willing to tell you things. It's such an incredible act of service. I think a lot of our culture has gotten a little passive around that. But that guy could have just left and be like, yeah, Steven's a good enough guy. He didn't ask the right questions, and that's fine.
Right. And I got to go on with my life.
Yeah, I got to just go on. But he took the time. I just think that's one of the best acts of service that we can do.
I completely agree with you. And you're right. Some of that is lost in modern life. I mean, that old truism, whatever, about helping the old lady across the street, fundamentally, it doesn't help you in your day, and it maybe slows you down from getting to your next appointment. But you help that older person across the street, and it is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. That action is a daily way in which you go, I want to live in a world where this is how we are, And that guy did that for me. He was like, hey man, I'm going to take another 2 minutes because I know where you're going, and it's worth it to me that you get where you want to go.
Can you talk a little bit about how the Sukha works, or how a user uses it, and features are fine, but just generally when somebody says, hey, I'm a remote worker, I can't manage my time and I can't play with my kids at 3 because I got to do more work. What is their experience like?
Yep. You know what? Why don't we do that in a fun way, which is, let me tell you the problems after doing this for 5-6 years, let me tell you the problems I hear all the time and how we address them, because these are the things that people come to me going, can you help me with this, right? Number one, and remember your episode with Stephen talking about resistance and all that, and he talks about how hard the cold start thing is in the morning, right? He is not alone. I have that. A ton of members of Sukha express that same thing of that sense in the morning of, I don't know where to start, and it often gets labeled as procrastination. Oh, you know what? I'll go throw in a load of laundry and I'll come back and get going. Oh, I didn't wash the dishes from last night, whatever it is, right? When you really dig down on what is that procrastination, procrastination is not actually the thing you need to solve. When you go deeper, it's often about a sense of overwhelm. And what I hear in talking, and doing the why with members It's often about my task list is overwhelmingly long. I don't even know which task to start with. Oh, I look at my first task and it's so big, I don't know where to begin that task, like things like that, right? So what did we do? We created a smart assistant that helps you come up with 3 things you can do. And if you just say 3 things, not I'm going to do 17 things today, which is BS. I don't do it. You don't do it. No one can do 17. But if you just say, here are 3 things I can carve out, and your smart assistant Sukha, interacts with you and makes sure that there are things that are accomplishable. Like if, you're working on your book, you're like, my first task is write the book. Yeah, no, you're not going to write the book today, but your assistant will guide you towards, what? Here, a magical task is, how about we write an outline for chapter 1? Oh, cool. Okay, great. How long do you think that should take you? I could probably do that in 45 minutes. Okay, you know what? Let's make that your first active task. And when it breaks down like that, and you have someone that helps you get going, it is true. Then you build the momentum. And the second and third task, you kind of blow through because you're like, I got this. So that is one aspect of the Sukha, is just simply, we have a smart assistant that knows you. If it knows that you do your best work in the morning, it will suggest, hey, Adam, I know tomorrow is a writing day for you and you're going to write in the morning. By the way, you seem to accomplish your work on time when you listen to this playlist. So how about I'll meet you tomorrow morning at 9 and I'll put on ambient atmosphere for you, or I'll put on sonic caffeine, or, we have a ton of naturescapes. I listen to a lot of rain. I think I just miss it from being in Virginia. And we have an entire 2 hours of rain in the Himalayas. One of our sound engineers was in Kathmandu and just recorded 2 hours of rain. I listen to that all the time. And I love that my smart assistant's like, hey, Steve, you know what? You want to listen to, the dream rain of the Himalayas? I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. So that I think is a big part, is just like helping you get going and getting over the hump.
And I know a little bit about the timers too. You can set up timers to help you remember to take breaks. I mean, that's one of the hardest things, is knowing when to take breaks. It's almost like it's an assistant in the sense, like, to help you manage yourself. Because, like, for whatever reason, we're not the best at, like, Steve Jobs talking about how we overestimate what we can do in a short amount of times. He talks about like a year, but like we do that in days. Like, we try to do way too much. I was training for and it's hard. Like, we for some reason we do best when we have something outside of ourselves helping us. When I was training, I did an ultra marathon in the spring, and
wow,
we were about a year ago, and my
you say
friend
that like it somehow makes it more achievable. Oh, it was in the past. Doing an ultra marathon is not to be sneezed
it was
at.
great.
Okay.
It was great, but I brought it up to say we came up with this. My friend I was training with, we came up with this phrase called voluntary schizophrenia, which is like voluntarily creating agreements with yourselves that aren't logical, like running a certain amount of time, and just agreeing to live in this kind of delusion in an effort to go, like, we had to, like, create a separate personality from ourselves, coach ourselves to do the things we needed to do.
That is so interesting, because you hear that. I remember.
It sounds kooky for sure, but it actually kind of works
No,
and makes sense.
not kooky. I was reading about that it was specifically through the lens of music. I think it was Dan Runcie who writes Trapital, that music industry newsletter, which I still read, even though I'm not in music. He's just an incredibly insightful guy. And he wrote an entire newsletter, blog post or something, about the alternate ego, the way so many of the pop stars that he knows or he's friends with, they have that thing that they put on in order to do the thing they can't do. Whether it's like, I think Beyonce had that Sasha Fierce, right? And Taylor has one. Like, a bunch of these stars have this thing where it's like, okay, I need to go do this thing that I don't think I'm capable of, but my alter ego, my schizophrenic, like, multiple personality is great at.
Guy Ritchie is kind of the same thing. He always wears a suit, and that is a suit of armor that he puts on to take on the world, and it gets him in something. A word that I think you really embody is posture. Like, when you were sharing your story about lucky stuff happening, as much as lucky stuff's happening, I think it also is a posture. posture of openness and curiosity that can allow things to happen. There's that story of the young man like looking for pearls on the beach, and there's thousands of pearls on the beach, and he's picking each one, looking at it and throwing it over his shoulder. He gets so in the habit of throwing them over his shoulder, he ends up picking up one with a pearl and throws it over his shoulder before he even recognizes it. He didn't have the right posture to see the opportunities.
That's so interesting.
But for Guy Ritchie, it's like actually physical clothes that helps him get in the posture.
That prepares you for that. Yeah.
If Cal Newport started a company, it seems like it would be a lot like yours.
Okay, so I met Cal Newport.
Really?
Here's the funny thing is, so in doing this, there are a lot of people smarter than I who have written a lot of better stuff than anything I will ever think of, right? So why not read that? So reading the Clears, the Newports, and the Ryans, and she sent Mahai's book on flow. Like, you read these guys, you go, oh, these are great solutions to these problems. I'll be super honest, and maybe too honest, which is when you read a dozen of those books, you realize they boil down about the same productivity principles. They all have their own vocabulary and their own book they have to sell, and kind of like their own examples, but there are common ideas about how to get into a flow state, even if you don't call it a flow state, even if it's just a deep work state, right? The thing. So ended up talking, I got on a Zoom, which he doesn't do often, but with Cal, someone had introduced us and was like, you guys should know each other. And he had mentioned us once on his on the Deep Questions, his podcast. And it is absolutely true. Like, one of the things that we have built inside Sukha is an embodiment of some of those principles of saying, like, how can we give you the necessary ingredients for you to get into flow? And that is both, like you said, timers, the smart assistant, the music that's designed, to scientific principles, blah, blah, the binaural beats, if you want that. But it's also the thing of like, hey, take healthy breaks. Like, respect if you are a Pomodoro guy or girl, great. Or if you have your own rhythm, like I do 55s and 5s. But there's that thing of saying, like, this 5-minute break will actually make the next 50 minutes or 25 minutes better rather than just grinding it out. And that adaptability is one of the things that we wanted to build in here, because the principles are common, but how they apply to you is specific.
Yep. Yeah, for you also too. I think the other thing when you talk about lucky stuff happening to you is Cal Newport, as much as he writes around productivity, he wrote a really great book about meaningful work called So Good They Can't Ignore You, which was really like basically saying, like, yeah, the follow your passion stuff is great, but more important than that, just do great work with the work that is right in front of you, which I think is really powerful. I was going to ask a question about like the future of remote work, because economic concerns, variety of reasons, a lot of people going back in the office. But what I was thinking about with that is, I worked at a tech startup that was doing remote work. I don't personally believe, I think for a tech startup, lean in-person teams leveraging technology and delivery models is the best. I also am a big believer in sprints and maximizing every day. I could see a scenario where we have in-person teams maximizing the Sukha for all the same reasons.
Yep.
Like, hey, he's in his work zone, boundaries, all that stuff. What comes to mind to you?
I completely agree with you. And I'm going to tell you this, which is part of what I enjoy so much with working in tech now, is that there are lessons from film that overlay really well to tech. And I'm going to give you an example. For decades, this is pre-pandemic, this is pre-smartphones, right? Film has found a way to manage to lead and both to also to contribute through the different stages, which is films all begin remote. They are writers alone at home most of the time, or in coffee shops, working away by themselves or with their writing partner, right? Then eventually there's like a lunch with the producer at a restaurant where they pitch their ideas, right? And they go back to revise the stuff alone. Then your idea gets enough traction that someone puts some money towards it. You have a production office. 1 or 2 days a week, you go in. You're in hybrid mode, right? We need to meet with the production designer. What does this look like? Tuesday we have to meet with the costumers. You come in for a couple hours, and then they go off and write. They get notes from the studio, notes from the star, right? They're writing. And then one day, $125,000 a day, you are on set, all of you, all the time, day and night, for principal photography, and it's rough. Then you go back to hybrid with editors working here and there, sound editors, film editors, and then you go back to remote. And through all that remote, hybrid, in-person, hybrid, remote, there are established ways in which film has worked without even really ever calling it remote work. Like, oh, my writers are in remote work mode. It's not. It's just a thing that's appropriate. So when you bring up, yes, there are absolute advantages to working in person together, I completely agree with you. I just think that a lot of the world became aware of the advantages of remote work at times. For example, a small tech company like mine, the ability to hire talent globally, that's huge. I am not Meta where I can throw $500,000 at someone and say, move to SF or move to London, right? I'm not. So if I want to get the best designer that digs what I do and has a similar value system to Sukha, and she's in Montreal, I can do it, right? And that's a big one. Also, not losing the time commuting. Like, there are advantages to both. And there are other times when it's great to be in person. Like, I can't creatively vibe with someone over video conference. I can't. I need to be in the room. Maybe I'm old school. Maybe I'm retarded. I don't know what it is, but it's like there is something about whether it's you're breaking story and you're like, I don't know, what do you think Morrisey does in the third act when the dragon comes? There's somehow being in the room with a whiteboard where you figure out what the hell Morrisey should have done, right? But sometimes you're like, what's that user action? What should it be? Oh, I've always loved the way Tinder did that. Does that apply? Somehow being there as opposed to being on a Zoom where you're like, well, let me take this offline and think about it and get back to you, So anyway, that's how I feel about it.
Oh, I completely agree. And like with the lean teams, I think one of the emphases will be outsourced delivery models. Like, you'll keep your lean teams and you won't be trying to do everything in house. So you'll be using distributed labor. But even if you're in person, like, you still want people to be maximizing every day. And with the insights, I don't know if there's a team version of the Sukha, but with the insights, it could aggregate and help the team celebrate and give visibility into the accomplishments. Because that's the other thing too, that even with in-person teams, you still don't have a ton of visibility into what other people are doing and how they align with the objectives.
You were totally right. So one of the things we build is, in addition to the main Sukha tribe group, right? We have the ability for teams, and it's largely engineering teams that have approached us for this, that they have a private room with their own name that they come up with, and they have a private chat. And as they finish things, they have the option, when you're working, once a day, so it's not spammy, once a day when you finish something, you can click the button and it'll post into the chat what you did. Like, oh, Adam finished, squashing the bugs in our iOS app in 4 hours and 12 minutes. And it posts in there. And people can respond to it and post emojis or be like, oh, Adam, thank God you killed that. The iOS app was killing us, whatever. And it's a super fun and lightweight way for, like you said, the team to sort of feel in contact, even if they're in separate offices, if they're 2 offices over, or if one's at home in Montreal and one's in SF, So yeah, I agree with you. It's something about having a daily way that you're in contact with your team, you share what you're doing and how it contributes, that it helps your team feel cohesive.
I think the comments on teams I've been a part of would be 4 hours, 12 minutes. What were you doing for the other 3? What are you seeing from like a growth and go-to-market standpoint?
I'll tell you what's funny is we have had zero growth from a number of channels that I've tried, but we've had a bunch of growth from one other channel, or 2 channels to be exact. So tried a lot of like paid social newsletters, things like that. And what I realized after those were basically a waste of money. And I know that there's the message channel ICP. So all have to kind of match to make the thing work. So I'm going to take the responsibility and the blame. Somewhere in there that those did not work, they were a waste of money, right? But when querying people who did come, and we have a 96% month-over-month paid retention. Like, the people who find us and use it, it becomes a daily tool, right? So the thing I noticed is they are all basically over 30, college educated, some with postgraduate degrees, right? They are engineers, they're writers, they're designers. And they have some sort of either hybrid or a remote work thing where they have time to do focus work separately and then come back to the group. And when I asked them, like, well, what about this? They basically said, hey, the world has evolved to the point where if I see advertising, I actively block it out of my mind. I assume it's garbage. If I see influencers paid to talk about it, it falls in that category of like, some girl in a bikini holding up an energy drink for Logan Paul. And you're like, dude, this is garbage. The one thing that has worked, or maybe I should say two things, are number one, referrals. When Adam tells Steven, no, dude, I use this, like it's good. The trust, the signal to noise ratio in that is super high, where it's like, oh no, Adam actually uses this. I should try this, right? So that's super high for us. And the second one is certain podcasts. I've been invited on a bunch of podcasts, and it is an entirely different relationship people have with someone like you, where it's like, if you actually say, oh, this I think is a good thing, they're like, hey man, I've been listening to this guy for 6 months. He's like a friend of mine. We don't hang out, but like, I know how he thinks. This is worth trying. Those have been really high for us because I think the authenticity is really high. If a friend telling you, or a podcast host that's a real serious guerrilla guy.
When you're sharing about the referrals, that makes so much sense. I mean, you have these cohorts of enthusiast potential customers, and whether it's writers or engineers, like those are within themselves atomic networks. And, when they get together and say, hey, I've made more progress on my projects than ever before, and I'm using this thing, like people
There's
want
nothing
to
like that.
There's nothing like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's next for the Sukha?
So one of the biggest problems with Sukha is that the existing code base is just resource hungry, and it eats up too much RAM. It's super, heavy on your GPU and your CPU. So we did a line one straight down to the studs rewrite, not a single character of code from the old code base. Right before you and I started recording today, I was in the alpha, and it actually works. We're going to have a beta in a week or two and give it to a bunch of our power members and be like, please tell us what you think. Be brutally honest before we release it. So the next thing is coming out with a real reimagining of how this works based on everything that I've heard. All the people who tell me I love this, and all the people who have been like, dude, I would never use this. It's to this, it's to that. Super helpful. People who hate on you actually are sometimes more helpful than people who are just like, great job,
For sure. I mean, they especially if they're willing to tell you.
Yes. So that's it. 2.0 comes out really soon.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Can you talk a little bit, you mentioned like the power of failures. You talk a little bit about your relationship failure to today versus maybe when you encountered your first one.
Okay, great question. And I will tell you something. I'll tell you something I learned that's helpful, and I'll tell you about the pain of that, which is when I was really young, I was very lucky and I worked really hard. So I had a lot of successes. I was accepted to USC when I was 14. It was like, wow, come here. They paid me to go to school. IBM paid me on top of that.
When did you graduate?
When I was 18.
Okay.
So I did 4 years. Yeah. So it was like, there was a lot when I was young, like really young. There was like, oh, this is just all going so well. And people tell me how smart I am, right? And definitely the exit I had in my 20s selling Centropolis, that was like, oh man, how hard could this be? Like, you start a company with the director and producer you did the, big movie with, and everyone just wants to be your friend, right? Oh my, can I even tell you, like, when I was at Fox, it was the most miserable experience. And I don't mean miserable in that I have never had to work in the salt mines. I've never been part of the sex trade. I've never been, so let's calibrate this. Miserable on a scale where I'm lucky to call this miserable. Let's not joke, right? But assuming that is my scale of like, oh, hey, I've been really successful. People have been really supportive of me, to, man, like I'm failing in this job. Like this job at Fox is just like the movies I want to make, my boss doesn't want to make. All he cares about is making a sequel. Oh my God, I'm going to sit here and just grind out bad sequels, right? So I go to do these two tech companies to show everyone, well, this is what I want to do. And they both fail, right? Just like, I'm telling you, part of why I moved to New York was I was just so shamed. I would go out to the gym and like friends would be like, how's it going with your thing? I was like, I want to shoot myself through the face. It failed. Like, I don't even want to see you. You know what I mean? So that was really hard. But I'm going to tell you, there was something I did twice that helped me build this current success. And it was when both those companies failed and I had to, let everyone go, had to like sit there with myself, had to talk to all my investors and be like, hey man, this is as far as we've taken it. I sat in a chair, not with my phone or my iPad or my laptop. I sat in a chair with a pad of paper and a pencil, like old school. My muscles were going to write this. And I wrote down to myself, what did I learn? What would I do differently? And I knew that in a week and a month and a year, like those lessons, they evaporate and you kind of like go back to your normal self. But I had seen like how many people, including myself, repeat the same patterns of stuff that they do wrong, right? They don't stop. They're drawn to make this mistake, right? And I wrote down, what were my mistakes from my point of view? Maybe right, maybe wrong, but they were my clinical assessment of like, you failed. Why? I look at those two pieces of paper routinely and ask myself, am I doing this again? I'd like to believe that I'm not. I'll tell you, one of those things was when I left Fox to go do the tech company, I did not listen to our members enough. I didn't listen to enough people who wanted to give me criticism, who wanted to give me advice, who wanted to give me help, because I had a very arrogant, headstrong idea of like, tech is all about being a visionary and like no one can tell you, like you think no one told me to make an iPhone. I'd be making faster horses for my carriages if I were Henry Ford. Like that thing is like, man, that was arrogant of me. It was wrong, and it didn't serve me. It didn't serve my investors. It didn't serve my team. I had great teams with both companies who tried really, really hard, and that was a failure of me. And it is something now I take a lot of time to do, to go, tell me about this. What works for you? What doesn't? No, tell me more what doesn't. No, tell me more what doesn't. And it's like eventually people are like, okay, let me give you that feedback you need. So that's the good thing that came out of the failure. But man, the bad thing was like, whew, I feel like, I feel like an idiot.
Those feelings, like feeling those feelings is such a powerful thing though. Mm-hmm. Because Mark Twain's got a quote that I talk about a lot, is a man who grabs the cat by his tail can learn something he could learn no other way.
Yes.
As much as you want to read the 12 books and there's just certain things that when you learn them on your own, hopefully it's first degree burns instead of second or third. But like there are ways you change.
I'm having a son this year. Laura's pregnant. We're having a son this year. And I've definitely switched to that mode of, how do I balance? Let me pass this along to you, and you're going to have to make this mistake to understand. You're going to have to grab the tail.
Yeah. I went to a men's retreat once, and we did an exercise where we talked about, things from your father you want to continue, and then chains you want to break. Which I think in this, I think you're going to have such a profound opportunity to do those things, and it is delicate too. Like, you have all this, have all this wisdom, but like, how do you share it with discernment to let your kid still be a kid? So it's an exciting chapter. Well, Stephen, you've been so gracious with your time and your wisdom. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and the work you're doing at the Sukha?
Oh, super sweet of you to say. I'm very accessible. If I can help anyone in any way, it doesn't have to be about Sukha, but just talk about focus, work, concentration. My email is very public, which is Stephen@thesukha.co, which is THESUKHACO. Love to help. Definitely want to share the lessons that I've learned. And it is a great way to stay in contact. And anyone who wants to see what we're doing, it is surprisingly thesukha.co, the Sukha Company. So thesukha.co.
We'll have links to your website in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. This is awesome, Adam.
Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Morrisey. That conversation was with Stephen Puri, a multi-time founder and former film executive currently working on the Sukha, which helps workers overcome procrastination. What I enjoyed about the episode was Stephen's lessons he shared across working in film and tech, and how we can use productivity tools like the Sukha to become happier, more productive, and healthier. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend, and we'll see you here soon. Thanks.